a day. We're learning Igeres HaKodesh, Sacred Letters 29. We're on page 298. It's a very, very long and difficult letter. The Alter Rebbe here seeks to explain to us the virtue of halacha. Within Torah, you have different parts: Gemara, Kabbalah, Chassidus, halacha. This Igeres is all about the importance of halacha and why halacha touches the deepest part of Hashem. That's in a nutshell the message of this long letter. How he comes to that, he uses a lot of Kabbalah and a lot of Gemara and a lot of Farshim and a lot of Rambam, a lot of stuff, a lot of in between the lines as well. And the Alter Rebbe basically begins with the Pasuk in Mishlei, which we say every Friday night, and hopefully when you say it, you mean what you say, which is Eishes Chayil al Teres Bailo. A woman of valor, Eishes Chayil, is the crown of her husband. In other words, the woman is greater than the husband. Now, this isn't, as many people think, this is my chance Friday night to laud and praise my wife, especially if I have guests there. I mean, that's a side benefit, and I'm not belittling it, but there's something greater happening. Shabbos is called Shabbos Malkus, or the Shabbos Queen. And we're embracing the Shabbos Queen. Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila. The Shabbos Queen, the Isha, the woman, the Eishes, is the Ateres Baila, is really the crown of the husband of the king. So it says in Kabbalah, explained the Chassidus at length, that it's through us Yidden, who are considered the queen of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is the king, that we create in Hashem something greater than kind of Hashem himself, although it all comes from God. Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila. For God to be the God that's all powerful and everything else, Eishes Chayil. It's coming through the Isha, through Yisrael. Now, of course, who chose and wants that? It's God. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the system and way Hashem wants it to be expressed and experienced and accomplished is through Eishes Chayil. This was the opening verse. What does it have to do with Torah, with halacha? So it's brought down in the Gemara and elsewhere that Ish ve'Isha. Isha is represented or represents, is symbolic of Torah Shabbal Peh, the oral tradition, and Ish, the man, is symbolic of Torah Shebiksav, the written tradition. Right? So Eishes Chayil Ateres Bailo, that the Isha Avram, that the Torah Shabbal Peh, specifically the oral law, creates the crown to the Ish, to Torah Shebiksav, which means, Yaini, from this verse, based on this approach, that Torah Shabbal Peh is even greater than Torah Shebiksav. The oral tradition, the oral law, is greater than the written law. Wow. And this is explained in many places, that the oral law, Torah Shabbal Peh, is based on the written law. So all of the oral law has as its premise the written law. But the written law is brief, and the written law is cryptic. Comes along the oral law, the Torah Shabbal Peh, and opens it up. And when you're able to open it up in a way that it becomes broad and elaborate and explanatory, it becomes very tasty, very seasoned, very delicious, very delightful. And this is what the Alter Rebbe says here. Then he quotes a Gemara in Megillah. This is all from the beginning of the chapter, which we learned yesterday, where the Gemara says, if you use Isser, the crowns of the Torah, you will cease to be. Self-benefit of the crowns of Torah is wrong. Why the crowns? Taga. Taga this is Aramaic, means crowns. So the Gemara says that this refers to someone who learns halachas and uses the crown of Torah for themselves. And we know that kol hashoyna halachas b'chol yom muftach lo yishbel ben olam haba. Someone who learns halachas each day is promised to merit the world to come. Says the Alter Rebbe that when you abuse the crown of Torah, halacha, that's a reason and a cause for death, for cessation, for punishment. So what we see from this is the emphasis is on the kisra shel Torah, on the crown of Torah. Not only, as we said earlier, that there's virtue and advantage to the oral tradition, Torah Shebal Peh, as a generality, but within Torah Shebal Peh itself, halachas, law, halacha, Jewish law, is the ultimate. And this is what he seeks to explain. And the Alter Rebbe then brought, and Yoni asked the question, and we'll give him the answer. The Alter Rebbe brought the concept of tainuk, the difference between tainuk and rotzen and tainuk, willpower and pleasure. Where willpower is dependent on the outside. The outside triggers the individual, who then displays their willpower towards that issue that he wants or she wants. Whereas tainuk is within man. That's why Isser and everyone else, in Chassidus it says that there's a correlation between the midos, the emotions, and will. And there's a correlation between the wisdom, the chokhmah, the idea, the intellect, and tainuk. When you comprehend something, it's not you're being fulfilled by something outside of yourself. Of course, you studied something now, but when you understand it well and you have pleasure from understanding it, it's in you. So that's the correlation between idea and pleasure. Will is associated with the outside, the midos. The midos are triggered, right? Love, fear, mercy. I have mercy on him, on this situation. I fear him, I fear this situation. In other words, the situation triggers the fear, triggers the mercy, triggers the love. It's not within you. It's outside of you, impacting you. Whereas when it comes to pleasure, it's within you. So the Alter Rebbe says that when we're talking about mitzvahs are rotzen Hashem. Right? We have two things. Torah, which is chokhmah. Chokhmasai, you've seen this many times in Chassidus. Chokhmasai v'ritzono yizborech. The wisdom and will of the blessed be He Hashem. What's the difference between chokhmasai v'ritzono? Chokhmasai goes on the chokhmah, and ritzono goes on the mitzvahs. Mitzvahs create the will of God. The will of God is expressed in mitzvahs. The will of God is not expressed in Torah. I'm talking about Torah study, not the mitzvah of Torah. The Torah study. Torah study is intellectuals, understanding. This is why, Yoni, the word tzachos, which you said means clear, here the Alter Rebbe brings it based on a pasuk in Yeshaya. He says, Lashon, Tzocha tzoma. Tzocha tzoma is meaning thirst. It's such a it's such an experience that it's so pleasurable that you have this thirst for it. So it's not a contradiction to modern Hebrew and how they use it, because literally, yes, tzacha means clear, correct. But in the context of the way the Alter Rebbe is using it, he's quoting, he uses it as associated with the word sama, as it says in Yeshaya Novi. So the answer is that the word tzacha has two meanings: clear and thirst. Okay, let's now turn to page 298. We are on the bottom of the page. The will of the supernal will of the blessed Hashem, Mechone, is nicknamed, v'nikr is called b'fichach me'oemes, in the mouths of the scholars of truth, referring to those that study the Kabbalah, b'shem keser elyon. It is called supernal crown. Uvoi, and this has Tarach, Tov Reish Chof, 628, Abudei Oyer, pillars of light, V'chulu, etc. What does this mean? The Alter Rebbe explains. Pirush, Derech Moshel. Take, for example, K'moi sheyesh amudim, just as there are pillars, Bebeis Chayma, in a home of stone, Godol, a large home. Nitzavim ba'aretz, the pillars stand on the ground. The Rosham, and the head of the pillars, mechuber betikra, are attached to the ceiling. This is building 101, even though today the architectural building is, you don't need those pillars anymore. Reminds me, Chaver, in 770, there's pillars. And when they redid it, they wanted to remove the pillars and, update and not need pillars. You can build without it. The Rebbe didn't let them. The Rebbe was such a stickler for, if this was the way it was good once. Don't waste money on new creative things. If they're asking the Rebbe, he said, no. I think now, they already removed it. But I remember that we had this discussion when we were Bachrim in the 1970s and 80s about those pillars. Because the pillars block the view. You have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people, and the Rebbe's all the way in the front by the Mizrach wall. You want to see him, so... On the other hand, by the way, sometimes the pillars were very useful because guys used to climb up the pillars to view, to see. But anyway, here we're talking about pillars. So pillars connect the ground to the top, the bottom to the top. This is the mushal. This is the analogy. Now comes the moral. So too, in the moral, Kesed Elyon Baruch Hu, what we talk about the supernal crown of blessed be Hashem, Hu l'mayla b'pchinas madregas ha'chochma. It's a crown, Yoni. It's above what's inside the brain, the head. It's the crown above. V'hu miloshen koseres. The word keser is from the word koseres, which means it surrounds. Shu machtir umakif al hamochin. It surrounds and crowns over sheb moichin shebarosh, over the intellect in the head. Shehem Prinas Chabad, for they are only Chochma Bina Das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Ve'rotzen zeh, this will of Hashem, which comes from Keser, which is higher, Nislabish b'taryach mitzvahs HaTorah. It invests itself in the 613 mitzvahs. V'zayim mitzvahs d'Rabbanan and the 7 rabbinic mitzvahs, i.e., you get 613 plus 7 is 620. Tarach Amudi Oyer, as it says, the 620 pillars of light. Sherubim kekulam, the majority of them, hey mitzvahs maisiyas, are practical mitzvahs. And even those that are not practical, the gam atluyas b'dibur, those mitzvahs that depend on speech specifically, not action, not ma'aser. Hokaimalam, we have a teaching in Torah, the akimas vasov, the movement of the lips, have ma'aser, is considered action. It says the Alter Rebbe even more so. V'gam atluyos b'machshava, even the mitzvahs that are not dependent on action and not dependent on speech, but are dependent on thought, oy belev, or on the heart, harei ha-mitzvah nitna l'odom hagashmi. The mitzvah was given to the physical person, shebaylam hazeh, that's on earth, dafke, shu bal b'chira, who has choice, lahates levav v'letoiv, to either incline his heart to good, v'chuli, etc., or the opposite. So what's the point? The point is that all mitzvahs, whether it's machshava, whether it's a mitzvah expressed in action, which most are, or dibur, or even in machshava, the machshava was given to a person who has free will. So in other words, there's a kind of an action associated with a person's mind. Do I decide like this, or do I decide like that? So even though I'm not doing it in action yet, and I'm not even speaking about it, I'm thinking about it, the thought process itself lends itself to an action orientation, because what's going to follow is a decision of action based on the way you understand it and the way you feel about it. Mashenkin on the Shama, this is all the body. Mashenkin, conversely, the soul, beloy guf, without a body, ain't tzarich l'tzavos al zeh. You don't need to command it to do these things because it's a soul. V'nimtza. Now the Alter Rebbe summarizes this point. Sha'amitzvahs hein al derech moshul. Mitzvahs are analogous to k'moyo amudim, to the pillars, nitzavim, mirum ha'mailas, that stand from the highest of levels. Hu ratzon elyon baruch hu. This refers to the will of God, the supernal will, and they connect ad ha'oretz ha'lazu ha'chumrius, to the physical corporeal world. V'heim al derech moshel k'moyo amudim chalulim shemakifim malbishim nishmas ha'odam. These are like pillars, that hollow pillars that surround and invest a person's soul, or rucha, or spirit, or nefesh, or nafshe, or soul. That's the animating part of the soul. Kayim mitzvahs, and when they mekayim mitzvahs. When you do mitzvahs, the Alter Rebbe is saying there's a connection between the will of Hashem and you. That's what we call the amudim, the pillars. V'derech amudim meilu, and it's through these pillars, oilin hanefesh ruch neshama shaloi, that a person's soul, spirit, and soul ascends adruma milos, to the highest of levels, litzrei b'tzrei rachayim, as Hashem, to bind himself to the binding of life with God. So what we're saying here, Chavre, is that we need the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs are the amudim, the 600. That's why it's called Tarach Amudei Or, right? The 620 pillars of light, because the mitzvah connects you to the Keser Elyon. That's what he says. Pirush, liyois tzururos, in order for them to be bound, umelubashos, and invested, Be'oira keser, in the light of the keser, of the crown, hu ratzon elyon baruch hu, this is the will of God, v'yidei levush zeh, and through this garment, yuchlu lachzes b'noyim Hashem. One can see the sweetness of Hashem, and Yoni again, he says here, v'tzachtzachos shelamayla, and the thirst, the great thirst of pleasure, mimaylas hakeser, which is of the virtue of the crown. And this is the inner aspect, as in a parable way. We're going to skip the parentheses. The prince actually won't skip it. Now, this is a rhetorical question. That's why it's in brackets. Although we explained elsewhere, the mitzvahs are the inner aspect of God. And here we're saying that Tainuk is really the inner and Pnimius, and the mitzvahs are Chitzonis compared to Tainuk. The answer is known to those that study the Kabbalah. There are many different shades and gradations and levels. That is found in every level of holiness. There are many levels of face to face. And there's many levels of back to back. Basically, his answer is, it depends how you're discussing the issue, in what context. In Kabbalah and Chassidus, I've said it again and again, I say it again, Alter Rebbe says it here in these brackets. When you can't ask a question from one level and the other level, because depending on one context, that level can mean one thing, and the same level can mean something else depending on another context. That's what he says here. I don't want to go into it. V'hinei. Zayim mitzvahs derabbanan, the 7 rabbinic mitzvahs, like Hanukkah and Purim, etc., Erevin, are not considered independent mitzvahs. Because the Torah already says, Loi Tosef, you're not allowed to add to the 620. But there's 7 rabbinic ones. They are a derivative of the 620, of the 613. And they're incorporated by Misper Tayag in the 6th count of 613. Which enclose the 613 faculties Shebenaran Ha'adam of the soul levels of man. So basically, the answer in short to this question is, when we say the 620, because it's 7 rabbinic and 613, it's not that we're adding and we're making up new mitzvahs. These 7 rabbinic were included somehow in the 613, and then they were then they were revealed. That's what he says. This is what the Holy Zohar says in Pekudei Daf Rosh Chotes Amud Beis, the Inun Uvdin, top of page 300. These acts, Tavin, these good acts, these good deeds, the Avid Barnash, that man does, Mashchem min ha'oira de ziva, it draws down from the light of emanation, ilah, supernal one, levusha, a garment. V'chami chuli b'nayim Hashem, and it causes one to have an ability to see the sweetness of God. So in other words, what are these levushim? Mitzvahs. V'agam dehosa mayda began eidin atachten. And although over there in Zohar it's talking about the lower level, shehalvushim shalom heim mitzvahs ma'asis mamish, that the garments there are from actual action-oriented mitzvahs. Avol began eidin, but the supernal gan eidin halavushim heim mirusa kavanas liba. Over there, the garments are created not from action, but from the will of the heart, the intent of the heart. Boraisa. In Torah, Vitzloisa, and through prayer, as it says over there, so it says the Alter Rebbe, Harei Kavona hi Kavonis Oske b'Torah l'Shmo. That's teaching of the Zohar is refers to when you study Torah for the sake of Torah, pure l'Shmo. Me'avas Hashem. Because you love God. And the mitzvah of learning Torah is also part of action-oriented mitzvahs. Because the movement of the lips when you study Torah, having mice is considered action. And thinking is different, is not like speaking. And that's why, Chevron, I've said it in the past, when you learn Torah, if you don't articulate the words with your mouth, you haven't fulfilled the Torah learning. Do you know that? Because it says v'dibarta bam. I don't care what language, English, Aramaic, Spanish, Portuguese, Hebrew, whatever. But you have to say the words out with your mouth.
So what about Shemiah? Let's say listening to Torah, like you're giving a shir, we're listening.
Oh, so there, Shomea Ka'oina. Chazal say Shomea Ka'oina. But you're right, very good point, and the answer is that there's a provision made for listening. But when you're learning yourself, you can't be listening to anybody because you're not saying it if you just,
But if you're making notes and writing out, that's
No.
also a ma'aseh.
No.
No?
It's a good thing, but you're not v'dibarta bam. It's interesting. It would be good it has to be looked in. Did you hear from someone that making notes is a substitute for saying the words?
No, but if you like write out, make an outline of what you just read, it's not just up there.
It's a very good question. I don't know the answer. I don't think so. And because it's different than what Yoini was saying. Yoini was asking about listening, Shomea Ka'oina. Chazal, in other words, Yoini, Chazal in Gemara and Halacha bring that concept. So we have what to rely on. What you're asking about is a very interesting thing, and we should look into it. But I don't know. I don't know. I don't think it's. You're saying that writing notes is Maisa. I understand writing notes is Maisa, but there's no Akima Svasov. It's a good question. It's a very good question. I'd like to look into this. I'd like to talk to some Talmidei Chachamim about this. Let's go on. Umadam ki mailas hakavona. And the virtue that kavana has over speech and action is not from its own perspective. It's because the shining of the supernal will, as it says in the first section of Tanya, chapter 38, my das says the Alter Rebbe, you should know. That the will of God that's invested in the 613 of the written Torah, it's very covered and concealed. It only comes out. This is what we're saying. It comes out only in the oral law. Look at this. It says in the Torah, I don't know what that means. It's concealed. Bind. Bind what? Apples? What? Bind what? Kshartim le'osa yadecha. Doesn't tell you. Shalopira shakosov. Eichu malikshe. The Torah doesn't say what you should bind. Umal titofis. In the next part, totofis beyanecha. What's totofis mean? Avram. Vehechenu beyanecha. And where's beyanecha? Between the eyes. Right? Vayotcha. And on your hand. So we don't know all of this. It's, in other words, what the Torah says is very concealed. But when it comes to the oral law, the oral tradition, you have to bind one bias, one tefillin box on al yad. The dalit batim, and then you have in the tefillin shel rosh, you have to make 4 compartments. Ubetochen parshas, and within them 4 sections of the Torah. Batim yiu me'oir, and the batim, the boxes that hold the parshas have to be me'oir me'uped, from refined tanned parchment. Umuruboyim, and the box itself has to be square. We all know if it's not square, it's invalid. Umukushorim b'ritzuah shaloir shchuros, and it has to be connected to black straps, dafke, specifically. V'chol shar proti halachos asiyas tefillin, all other details of making tefillin, shenemra bal peh, that were said bal peh in the oral tradition. Val Yodcha, and when it says in the Torah, Ukshartem Yois a Yodcha, he has Roa Dafke. In other words, Yodcha is on the arm. That's what Chazal teaches. But like Kafayad, and not on the palm. Talking about the box. Shouldn't be on the palm, right? Ubeina Necha, and in between the eyes, Zeh Katkut V'loya Metzach. Not the forehead. You could think you put the tefillin on here. Beina Necha. Here is in between the eyes. I'll put it on here, the forehead. No. A katkut on the head. So the point Alter Rebbe is making, that without Torah Sheba'al Peh, it's all unknown. I will stop here and continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem, okay? Sei gesund, Chevra. Good learning. See everybody. Take care.